Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. So over the past couple weeks I've made some significant improvements to the PocketGo S30, and I think it's time to do a dedicated video on some of these updates that are now available. We've actually gotten to the point now where I feel comfortable saying that this is a brand new firmware that's available for your device. And so for now I'm calling it Simple30, and the idea behind this is that we're going to make this a much more capable device while keeping it very simple and user-friendly. So let me show you some of these updates that are now available. Number one, there is now a full RetroArch available. That means you can have hotkeys and cheats and rewinds and button mapping. All those things are available to you thanks to a developer who I'm not even going to pronounce their name, but you can see it up there on the screen. They were able to crack the code and allow us to have full RetroArch. Secondly, thanks to another developer, we now have a safe shutdown mechanism. So now you can actually shut down your device using the software and it preserves all of your save games, which is a really big bonus. And because we have full RetroArch, we now have access to 90 different systems and ports. So I have 20 systems that are available by default, but it's very easy to add all of the other ones to your system, and I'll show you how to do that in this video. And this is all thanks to Steve from Tech Toy Tinker, who was able to unlock all of this. And finally, the last thing I did is I optimized all the settings. So your emulators, your performance, your scaling, and your bezels have all been optimized for this experience. This isn't the most powerful system in the world, and it's not without its own share of faults, but at least we've been able to optimize what we can work with. And that's the whole idea behind Simple30. So I'm just going to tab through here and let you see all the systems that are available by default, and a lot of these are very similar to what I had in the add-on pack initially, but you can see here Nintendo 64 is now playable. And as you can see, I just really kept to some of those classic systems that you would find on a very simple device. But like I mentioned earlier, it's very easy to add others. Now the first thing I want to talk about is this standalone RetroArch. So every emulator now runs off of RetroArch Core other than the PSP emulator. And as you can see here, you can just jump into RetroArch, and it's at 1.9.0 version, which is the most recent stable version. So you can jump in here and you can change all your settings and you can tweak it exactly how you want. I've done a lot of that optimization for you, but you still have the freedom to do it yourself. Next up is the shutdown button. So you're just going to go to this tab and you hit the A button and that'll turn off your device. And the important thing about this is that it will shut down your SD card, which will allow you to preserve all your save games. Previously, there was all sorts of tricks and workarounds we had to do in order to get the games to save. Now all you have to do is just press that shutdown button. Super simple. Now settings hasn't gone through a lot of changes here, so basically they have the ability to change your language, and then you can change the brightness of your screen, which you can also just do in RetroArch, by the way. And you can also calibrate your joystick, and this is a very simple function that basically comes up with a box here, and you can see whether or not your joystick can reach all of the corners of this calibration tool. And if it doesn't, you know that you can adjust your analog sensitivity in RetroArch in order to fix it. Okay, so let me show you how to load this onto an SD card. First things first, just follow the links that I have in the video description and then download the file here. It's about 550 megabytes altogether. Once you've downloaded it, the next thing you need to do is you need to format your SD card for FAT32. I use an application called GUI Format, and I'll leave a link to that in my written guide down below. So just go ahead and select whatever drive your SD card is using. And if you want, you can actually label the SD card itself, so you could call it something like Simple30 just so you know which card is which. And then you just hit start. Okay, so now that you have a formatted SD card, let's move everything over to that SD card. All you have to do is just open up this zip file, and then select all the files and drag them over to your SD card. Super simple. Now, it might take a while to move everything over. It took me about 10 minutes to move everything over, and it's not because it's a huge file size. It's actually less than 1 gig when it's uncompressed. It's because it has a lot of little files moving over, and that can take a while to move over. So once you've moved everything over, you've actually installed everything onto your SD card. The next thing we want to do is just basically walk you through some of the different components that are available to you within this SD card. So let's start with the location of your BIOS files. It used to be in a BIOS folder that was on your SD card, but now that we use RetroArch, that's been moved over. So you have to go into the RetroArch and then the system folder, and in here you're going to put all your BIOS files. Now Dreamcast is a little bit different. Everything goes into a folder called DC, and you can see here these are the two files that you're going to need. And all of this is written down in the written guide that I have linked below, so if you want to go through it at your own pace, that's the place to go. But real quick, let me show you these other BIOS files. So these first three here are for the Sega CD. The next one is for Famicom Disk System. The next two I want to highlight are the Game Boy and Game Boy Color BIOS files. Now these are just optional BIOS files, but I really like them because it shows the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color splash screen when you add these in. Next you have Game Boy Advance BIOS, those are required. Then you have your Neo Geo, and then PlayStation 1, and then finally you have your different TurboGrafx CD or PC Engine CD BIOS files. In a nutshell, those are the BIOS files you're going to need. You're going to need to find them yourself and then put them in the RetroArch system folder. Okay, so now let me show you all the different emulators you can add if you'd like. So you want to go into the sections, then the emulators folder. And within here you can see these are all the systems that are available by default on your device. For example, there's Nintendo and Game Boy and Sega CD, all those kind of different systems. They're all available here. And they're all numbered in a specific order because that's the order they're going to appear in on your menu. So if you want to change the order or anything else like that, just change the numbering. Now when you go into this optional folder, you can see there are 71 additional emulators and ports available to you. So for example, if you want to play Game & Watch games, you want to play Sufami Turbo games, or you want to play just random things, they're all available now within here. And this is all thanks to Steve at Tech Tinker Toy. In addition, there are ports available, so if you want to play Wolfenstein 3D or Quake or Doom, those are all available to you as well. Now say for example you wanted to run the MAME 2010 emulator instead of the default MAME 2003 Plus one that I have. All you have to do is just grab that file and move it over into the emulators folder. And when you go back into the emulators folder, you can see it right there. And now it's going to be available in your main menu. And the same thing applies if you want to take a system away from your main menu, all you have to do is move it into the optional folder. So everything in the main folder will be visible, everything in the optional folder will not be visible to you. And that's basically it. So there's no need to delete any of these files or anything else like that, you just have to move them over into the optional folder. And finally, let me show you how to add your actual game files. So in that main directory, just go to the ROMs folder, and then within here you'll see folders for every single thing that you can add. So altogether there are 89 different folders, and these folders are going to correspond to the emulator you want to run. So for example, the N64 folder is where you're going to put all your Nintendo 64 ROMs. Okay, that's really about it. Let's eject this card and put it into our device. So to get started with an emulator, all you have to do is press the A button, and then you have your menu right here. Now here you're seeing a bunch of different preview videos, and in my earlier add-on pack video I showed you how to do all that. I'm not going to repeat that here, but it's relatively easy to scrape all those videos and add them to your device as well. But one thing that is new are different hotkeys. So select by default is your main hotkey enable button. So for example, if you hit select plus Y, it'll show you your frames per second, or if you hit select plus A, it'll pause the emulation. Additionally, if you hit select and R1, it's going to save your current state. And alternatively, if you hit select and L1, it's going to load that save state. Now select and R2 is supposed to be fast forward, but it's not working right now. I'm still working on it. Select and L2 is rewind, and that does work. Also, you can do select and up and down, and that'll change your volume. And select and left and right will change your different save state slot. Now to get to the main RetroArch menu, you just hit select and start at the same time, or you can just hold down on start for a few seconds. And within here, you're going to see all of the options that are typically available to you when you use RetroArch. Now if you're in the middle of playing a game and you want to quit the game, there's two options. You could go into the RetroArch menu and then close the content, or just hit select and power, and that'll close you out and go back to the main menu. So it's pretty simple, you just have to remember which hotkey does what. Select and power closes the game. Now another thing I went through and did is I changed the scaling on all of these different emulators. So for example, if you start up a Nintendo game, you'll see that it's running at a 4:3 aspect ratio. Now unfortunately, one of the things I'm still working on are shaders. So for example, if you turn on a shader here, and say you pick like a shader that you want to use with your Nintendo, so for example, I like to use the Scale 2X shader, it's going to rotate your screen by 90 degrees, and then you can't play anything. And so we're still working on this. A lot of this has to do with the display itself and the way it's been rotated, but hopefully we'll have a fix for this in the future. For now, every shader is just not going to work for you, unfortunately. Okay, so let's talk Nintendo 64 for a minute. Now one thing to keep in mind is that this device is less powerful than RK3326 devices. So any performance that you've been expecting from say an RG351P or anything else like that, it's going to be worse on this device. You can see here with F-Zero, it's running at a lower resolution. This is 320 by 240, and it's still not looking very good, nor is it playing at full speed. So unfortunately, you're just going to have to experiment and see which games do work for you. For example, Mario Kart 64 plays pretty well. So although it's very cool that we have Nintendo 64 working, I just want to make sure you temper those expectations because you're not going to be able to play every game under the sun. I would say at this point, probably maybe 10% of them are going to play pretty well. Now another example here is Mario 64. Now the gameplay is pretty good, One thing I do want to note is the analog stick sensitivity can become an issue. So what you want to do is go into the quick menu input section and then check out the analog dead zone and sensitivity. I've already set them to optimal settings, but you may want to play around with that depending on the game and the calibration of your device. Okay, so you can see here I'm running around and it's running relatively smoothly. I'm not seeing any frame dips here outside of the castle. But if I try to upscale it to 640 by 320, you can see just how much slowdown there is. It's running at about 16 frames per second. So unfortunately, you're not going to be able to play these games in high res. You're going to have to play them in a lower resolution. But I would say the performance of Mario 64 in particular, it's passable. You know, it's not perfect. There's some crackling in the audio and there are a little bit of slowdowns, but I don't think it's going to take away too much from the experience itself. If you have this device and no others, and this is the only way to play Nintendo 64, maybe you'll like it. Okay, let me show off Game Boy for a second. You can see here I have the boot screen loading, and that's because I've loaded the BIOS file here. But I've also added that Game Boy bezel, as you can see on the sides and top and bottom, and then I've also changed it to have a green screen so that it feels a little bit more like the original one. On top of that, I've also added some pixelation to the screen, so it feels a lot like an original Game Boy. Same thing with Game Boy Color. If you use those BIOS files, you get that splash screen, and then this also has its own bezel as well. And in addition to adding an LCD grid shader, I've also changed the colorization to make it more like the original Game Boy Color. And all these settings are set by default, but you can always change them yourself. Okay, so moving over to Game Boy Advance, everything plays great on this. You know, this screen is optimized for the Game Boy Advance resolution. So in general, this just naturally plays very well. If you love this S30 form factor and you love Game Boy Advance games, this is going to be a perfect combination for you. Okay, so let me show off a couple other systems. You can see here with Sega Genesis, everything is running nice. It's the same story with Sega CD, everything runs nice and smooth. And rounding out the group here, you can see with Sega 32X, there's no frame dips or anything else like that, it's running perfectly. Okay, so let's move on to harder systems here. So here's Sega Dreamcast, I'm running Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I'm definitely feeling some slowdown here, I'm seeing some dips in the frame rate. But in general, I would consider this game playable on this device. It's not going to be the same story with every game. So for example, with Soul Calibur here, you can see there are some graphical glitches, and there's definitely some slowdown and crackling with the audio. For me personally, I don't really like to think of this as a Dreamcast machine. Honestly, I really just want to make sure it runs 16-bit games and below very well. So one more Dreamcast example here you can see with Crazy Taxi. It's running pretty well. It does definitely have some dips when it comes to the sound, and you can tell because the sound will speed up and slow down and things like that. But overall, I would say it's at least somewhat playable. One nice thing about this new update is that you can play PlayStation using the PSX rearmed RetroArch core. So for the most part, PS1 games are going to play really well, and you have the ability to use both your shoulder and trigger buttons on the device. Personally, I like to test PS1 with Tony Hawk 2 because I know exactly when it has any sort of lag because I've played this game so much in my youth. And I'm happy to report that it's playing just fine. So moving on to PlayStation Portable here, I'm just going to come out and say this is not a PlayStation Portable device. You're going to be able to play some puzzle games and maybe some 2D games, but that's going to be it. And honestly, I don't know if the appeal is there to play a lot of high-end games on this system anyway, but you know, things like this puzzle game Luminous, they play just fine. But unfortunately, even playing Ridge Racer with a frame skip of 1, I'm having all sorts of slowdown issues. So my recommendation here is just to test out a few PSP games, maybe the ones you really want to try, but don't have very high expectations because for the most part, these games aren't going to play very well. So one note I do want to make is that I've pre-configured all the cheats available for you on the PSP emulator. But before we get into that, let me show you something funny about these videos. One thing you probably don't realize is there is a cat on my lap at all times while I'm filming. And that's because our 12-year-old cat, whose name is Chicken, she just loves sitting on my lap. So just a funny thing to think about is when I'm recording all these things, there's a cat on my lap at all times. Alright, so back to the video at hand. All you have to do is just in the main menu, go to the cheats section. And in there, all you have to select is import cheats. It'll boot you back to the main menu, but then all you have to do is go back into the cheats folder, and there you are. All the cheats are now available to you. So say we scroll down and we select max acceleration and max speed, that'll immediately be enabled in Ridge Racer now. So going back to the game, look at how quickly I'm accelerating now. So that's pretty cool. So even though, you know, Ridge Racer is not playing very well, it is pretty fun to just be able to smoke the competition like this. And I get it, it's cheating or whatever, you know what I mean? But that's what cheat codes are for, right? Anyway, I hope you enjoy that. Okay, so the last two systems I want to show off here, TurboGrafx 16 works just fine, as you can see here with Alien Crush, as well as TurboGrafx CD. And just a quick plug here, if you've never played the Castlevania Rondo of Blood game, this is the perfect Castlevania game. I love Symphony of the Night as well, and this is very, very similar to it. And they redid this one, they called it Castlevania Dracula Chronicles or whatever for the PSP. It's not as good as this one. This one's really great. So you owe it to yourself. If you're a Castlevania fan, you need to play this game. Alright everyone, that's it for this video. I'm pretty proud of how this is all coming together. To be honest, the PocketGo S30 still has its share of issues. For example, I think the face buttons are too small. I'm not a really big fan of the hard plastic they used on the D-pad, and I do think that those trigger buttons are not the best in the world. But at the same time, we are miles ahead of where we were just 2 months ago when this device first came out. I still have a few goals I want to do with this device. For example, I'd love to have Nintendo DS running on this device. And I also want to fix all those shaders issues, and I want to have a functional fast forward available to you as well. So there's still more work to be done, but at the same time, I'm really happy to report that this is a much better version than we had just a couple weeks ago. So be sure to check out my written guide to figure out how to install all this. And if you don't own a PocketGo S30 and you have $60 burning a hole in your pocket, this is not a bad way to spend that money. And sure, that's going to change in 6 months, it always does. But at the same time, this is a pretty unique device and a lot of people love this form factor, so check it out if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming!